In every high-level programming language, and PHP is no exception, a lot of the power of these programming languages comes from these inbuilt, what we call functions. These functions are like mini programs that do some of the most common tasks that are associated with programmers. And the idea behind that is instead of getting every programmer to constantly reinvent the wheel over and over again, that these very, very common tasks are encapsulated in these mini programs built into the actual back of PHP so that they can be called on at any particular time to quickly do these operations without having a programmer to code them all over again. I will show you the syntax and the operation of functions by way of example. So let's start with a function called strshuffle. str_shuffle is the name. Depending on your editor, if it's tuned into PHP, as soon as I actually type in the function name, it should actually highlight it in a different color. Every function that we have, anytime we call it, we have to use round brackets, whether it accepts an argument or not. And that brings us to the questions of what are arguments? Arguments are inputs. These values that are needed by the functions in order for them to be able to do the work that they're programmed to do. In the case of strshuffle, as the name would suggest, strshuffle is programmed to take a string, that is a piece of text, and shuffle up the characters to produce a type of an anagram. So the strshuffle function, it needs that single string, a single string that it can take, look at all the characters, and mix them around. So that single string in this case, I'm going to pass it in str1. Because it's a single argument or input, I can just put it in the middle of that parenthesis, those round brackets. The vast majority of functions in PHP return a value to the programmer. And strshuffle is not an exception to that rule. strshuffle returns this shuffled string. So in this case, when I pass it the string with the value examelo, it will shuffle up the letters and it returns it to me. So I can just presume that as soon as strshuffle has done its work, that piece of text that I have selected there in the middle of my code, I can take that as if it is this string that has been returned. I can take it as if it is the anagrammed or shuffled string. So what do I do with a shuffled string as a value? Well, I've got a few different choices, but what we've seen so far is I can assign it into another variable, or I can echo it out. Let's do both and see what happens. So I've created another variable called shuffled, and I've assigned in the result or the return of this strshuffle function that I've called. I've assigned the value into shuffled. That is a statement, so I need to make sure that there's a semicolon at the end. And then to see that result, I need to echo out whatever the value is contained within shuffled. So if I save that, go to my browser and refresh, I can see I get the examelo word shuffled up. In this example, I've used a function strshuffle that returns a string. Not all functions return strings. They can return lots of different things. Some might return a number. Some might return an array. Let's take an example of one that returns a number, strlen. And as you can guess, this returns the length of a string, or how many characters are contained there. So let's just keep things relevant. I'll change the name of my variable here. And let's see what it does. I'll save that, refresh my browser, and I see the result here. It contains 7 characters. And that tallies with what we see in the word examelo. So we've seen two very similar and very simple string functions. strshuffle, which shuffled the actual text that I passed to it and returned a string. And then I've got strlen, which counts the number of characters in the string passed to it and returns a number. Both of those functions, they take just one argument. Now I want to look at a function that takes more than one argument. Let's take a look at a slightly more complicated function called Sto Replace. What Sto Replace does is it looks for a substring within a string and replaces it with yet another string. So if I count up all the different inputs that a function like Sto Replace needs to work, well, it needs the string that it's going to look through. It needs the string that you want to search for within the first string. And then it needs a third string that you want to replace the second string with. That's a mouthful. So let's try it out. The way this is set up is I'm going to look for the string AME. I want to replace it with the string PE or A. And I want to do that to the string contained in str1. So just let me run through that again. I'm passing that I want to search for the string AME. Anytime I come across it, I am going to replace it with PE or A. And I'm doing this to this string that I'm passing in as the third argument. And that's the syntax of passing more than one argument into a function. I always separate the arguments by a comma so that PHP doesn't get confused between the different arguments that I'm passing it. And I can tell very distinctly what the different arguments are. That str replace returns a string to me. So again, I can assign that into a variable. In this case, I'll assign it into a variable called result. And I've already set up my echo statement here to echo out result. So what I would expect to happen is, because I'm searching through str1 as the third argument, it's going to find the letters AME in the middle, and it's going to replace those letters with the letters P, E, or A. Running that, and I get what I expect. We've looked at 3 different functions, and they all have to do with strings. So string length, string shuffle, and string replace. But they are only 3 functions out of a total of over 1,000 functions that are built into the basic form of PHP. So the question now is, how do you know all of the different functions that are available? And then how do you know what the specified inputs and outputs of those functions are? The answer is that every PHP programmer always has the PHP Function Reference close at hand, and it's available online. So I've got it here in my tab, PHP Function Reference. It's at php.net/manual. And in here, we can get all of the list of all the different functions that are available to me. Scrolling down through that page, I can see there's a text processing category, and inside there's a strings category. So if I click on strings here, I'll see lots of the different string functions that we're just after using, along with many, many, many more. And when I find different functions that I might be interested in, for instance, there is one that we're just after looking at, strlen, I can click on that and it shows me all the different descriptions along with what the parameters are, what the arguments are, what the return values are, along with some examples. So it's very, very useful. And that's an introduction to different functions and how they work in PHP.